I'm Harriet Frew, eating disorder therapist, teacher and podcaster, and you're about to start healing from your eating disorder and transforming your life and your relationship with food and body. I've worked in NHS and private practice supporting clients for 20 years, and I believe that recovery is possible for you. This podcast dives into expert interviews, evidence-based psychological approaches, and anecdotal tips from the therapy room from my years of experience. If you're wanting to heal your relationship with food, feel confident in your body, develop self-love and self-acceptance, and create a life of freedom and meaning, then this podcast is for you. Thank you for being here. Today I have a guest on the show, and I'm talking to Becky Grace Irwing, a BACP Accredited CBT and EMDR qualified therapist and qualified mental health nurse. Becky spent 8 years as a mental health nurse and 3 years as a CBT therapist, and she has worked across many mental health services for 14 years, including acute, forensic and CAMHS services, as well as university mental health and disability services and a London talking therapy service. She has a background history as a fitness and yoga instructor of 10 years and has worked in the fitness industry from the age of 17 to 35. Becky specialises in eating disorders, neurodiversity and complex trauma issues and the link between these, and she has lived experience of binge eating for nearly 30 years and has been recovered for 7 years. Becky has ADHD and is self-diagnosed with autism. Becky describes herself as a dog mum of 2 sausage dogs, a human first, and she likes to knit and is sustainability conscious. In the episode today, Becky talks about her own recovery journey, focusing particularly around eating difficulties and the interplay within neurodivergence. She then goes on to talk about why neurodivergent humans can be particularly vulnerable to developing eating disorders. She talks about eating disorders as coping strategies and explores in more depth the issues that often present in therapy when someone has ADHD or autism. It's a really interesting episode. Becky has a wealth of information to share. I hope that you enjoy it. Time for a short advertisement break. I can remember crying in the doctor's surgery 4 years into living with bulimia. I was desperate for help and wanted support to escape the torturous cycle of restriction, binge eating and purging. My face was swollen, my stomach ached, and I felt lonely and desperate, and I was told that the local ED service had closed and that there was no help available. I left at the time, dejected and lost. And it wasn't until 2 years later, when out in Australia, still struggling with the illness, I made the decision to support others in the way that I had not been supported. And I decided that I was trained as a counsellor and support others in eating disorder recovery. And at age 25 years old, I began this process. Starting in the NHS eating disorder service in Cambridge and in private practice later in my 20s, I was able to put my dream into a reality. Seeing clients, families, teaching, and in more recent years, social media, blogging, podcasting, training and supervising counsellors, I continue to be incredibly passionate about my work. But my latest offering is my Breaking Free from Bulimia online course. It's 12 steps, and it's packed full of valuable tools and strategies to help you break free. You'll start with understanding and making sense of your past and why you're struggling. You'll then work on motivation to change and root out the ambivalence and fear of letting go. You'll dive into the destructive impact of diet culture and get firmly in your own recovery lane. You'll practice regular eating and stabilising blood sugar levels to create a strong baseline for recovery, and you'll interrupt the binge and purge cycle. With support, you'll introduce your old forbidden foods and practice self-compassion techniques to become much kinder and supportive of yourself. You'll work on emotional eating and challenging your negative thoughts. And there's modules on finding your voice and becoming assertive, plus developing robust self-esteem and managing relapse with ease and continuing on the recovery road. 12 modules, self-paced, online, delivered in lecture and video content by me, Harriet Frew, expert by experience, having recovered myself from bulimia and having worked in the NHS and private practice with clients with eating disorders for 20 years. Link is in the show notes. It's the toolkit you need. Sign up today. Step into freedom with food and living the life that you want. No more restrictions, secret behaviours, shame and loneliness. Break free from bulimia today. Hi, Becky. Welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast.
Hello.
So it's lovely to have you here today. Before we launch in, can I get you to sort of introduce yourself first to the listeners?
Yeah, so I'm Becky Grace Irwing. I'm a BABCP Accredited CBT and EMDR therapist, also a qualified mental health nurse. And I spent a number of years as a mental health nurse, more recently as a CBT therapist. I've worked across many different services, mental health in lots of different areas, and in university mental health as well. I've got a background history as a fitness and yoga instructor. I did that for over 10 years, worked in the fitness industry as well for a fair while from my teens. I specialise now in eating disorders, neurodiversity, and that the blend between them and complex trauma, and how it's almost like a triangle, how they sort of meld in together. So that's my specialism. I've got a lived experience of binge eating for nearly 30 years, been recovered for the last 6 years now, and I have ADHD and I'm self-diagnosed with autism. And then outside of work, I just mentioned being a human first. I'm a dog mum. I like to knit and do stuff around sustainability. So that's me.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you, Becky. I know when I was just looking at your website earlier today, I was just really struck by actually you have done a lot of different things, haven't you? You're someone who has a very
it's the ADHD.
Wide and diverse interests. And it feels to me when I was looking through things, I was thinking, this is a woman with a lot of energy, but I guess you've probably had to manage that a bit as well.
Yeah, having ADHD comes with, I don't like saying that the superpower thing, it's a superpower as such. It has its pros and its cons. That's the best way to summarize it. I have to manage my energy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. When I was looking through your sort of things as well, I noticed that, like me, actually, you have a degree in biology, which is quite interesting. You're biological sciences. That's what I did at Sheffield many, many years ago.
Yeah, it all comes back to health, ultimately, biology. That's what it is. Like, it's a full mind, body, everything. So, yeah, I really, really, really loved that course, actually. And I have used parts of it now.
Sure. And initially, were you thinking that you might go into biology and science, or did you not really know at that stage?
No. Like many people, and I talk to clients about this a lot, is like, I think you get taught a linear path when you're at school and you go through the sort of education system. I did it because I was basically told, do something that you enjoy. And I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. I had no sense of my own identity. I did listen to what other people said and went, okay, you said I'm good at this. And yes, I do enjoy it, so I'll do that. And that's literally how I went into biology. I did have an interest in nutrition, to be fair, at that point, but that was also the starting point of my eating disorder. So I decided not to go into nutrition for that reason, because I had the sort of knowledge at that time, the self-knowledge to go, actually, this may not be a good idea for me. Yes, that's why I didn't take nutrition any further, but biology as a whole, yeah, absolutely loved it. Didn't have a clue what I wanted to do when I grew up, as it were. I still don't sometimes.
Yeah, it's really hard, isn't it, to know? I was very similar to you, actually, when I made that decision to do biology. It was almost like I enjoyed biology A level and seemed like the kind of next step, really. But yeah, not really having much sense of identity. And it's interesting because I did end up going on to do nutrition. I think as with many of us, you kind of fall down this rabbit hole. Yeah, but you went to King's as well, didn't you? Because I did my nutrition at King's, but you did your CBT training at King's. Yeah,
I did my CBT training at King's, my biology degree at University of East Anglia in Norwich.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I know we've worked together before, haven't we? We've done a little bit of overlap of running bulimia and binge eating groups in the NHS, but I guess I never really got to know you that well because it was very kind of fleeting, wasn't it? So
I know. Yeah, we just had to get straight in and get them out there.
Yeah. Anyway, well, nice to just know a little bit more about you, actually. So, Becky, I know you've had your own journey of eating disorder recovery and with sort of binge eating, and you talk in more detail about that on your website. And I thought also very generously, you've shared on Instagram, haven't you, a series of several videos really kind of talking through the several kind of stages of your recovery in a lot of depth, which I think really, really helpful and validating for people to know about. But I guess for the purposes of here today, we're not going to go through the whole of your story, but I wondered, could you just give us perhaps a little overview and then particularly perhaps tying that in a bit more to kind of your neurodivergent side of things?
I think I had the seeds of an eating disorder throughout my childhood. And when I say that, there was lots of sort of diet culture going on around the background with family members. I'd say a genetic background as well. I had dad who had an eating disorder, my granddad, family members, the whole of my paternal line, basically. had eating disorders historically. So I think that was the setup for me to kind of follow after that. So yeah, and then my mum was doing diets all the way through my teens, and that's what was being modelled to me. It was the 90s, early 2000s, so peak diet sort of culture, sort of the thin ideal models. What I saw growing up was Britney Spears, and then everyone needing to look like Britney Spears, and literally everyone needed to look, like there was only one body type really that I felt that I was supposed to have. And then the main trigger for me, so I had those seeds when I was a child of being around those factors, and I was bullied throughout my childhood because of my weight and size. The message from everywhere, being fat was the worst possible thing in the world that you could ever be. Then when I was 15, I lost a lot of weight in one go. And after GCSEs, I came back in sixth form. And I was like a different person physically. And I say physically because emotionally it was a mess. People treated me differently, very, very differently to the year before. And it was very confusing. So I learned, okay, people only value me because of how I look. That then stemmed on to going to university, being with friends who also had disordered eating behaviours. Those behaviours were very much almost this sort of competitive aspect to it as well. Then I thought I'd have the bright idea to become a fitness instructor because I absolutely adore doing fitness classes, which really fit with my, I suppose, that high energy motivation, sort of adrenaline rush, dopamine hit that I'd get from doing fitness classes, which I discovered when I think it was about 22, 23. I used to do ridiculous amounts of exercise because I get high from it. And I refer to that kind of dopamine hit as well. So it wasn't just about, you had the added bonus of keeping me smaller, absolutely. But there was also this kind of hit from going to teach class, which was you go out in front of an audience, you perform and you get a bit of a rush from it and you'd help other people in the process as well, which was really important. The ADHD side of things, my diagnosis came when I was 35. And I've always had quite an addictive, I don't want to say addictive personality because I don't actually describe myself as that now, or addictive behaviours. Those addictive behaviours within my family, addictive behaviours within me. So whether that's exercise, obviously, yes, restriction and diet culture, needing to keep in terms of the body image perspective. But there were other addictive behaviours I had as well, not just exercise, but painkiller addiction from the age of 16 to 26. So there was always just this, always something for me about always being on the go, never been able to stop, never been able to relax. And then the ADHD diagnosis came for me when I was working in university mental health and disability services, where I'd see all the students who had ADHD and autism. I ended up then accidentally specialising in that area, not like on purpose, but people are like, you're really good with these particular students and I'm like, I think there's something going on here. I think there might be similarities as to what's going on. And that's how I then got my diagnosis at that point. The autism side of the aspect is, for me at the moment, it's just about cost and paying for an autism diagnosis. But for me, self-diagnosis is still valid, very much so. And I see that for me come up in how my environment, my working environment particularly, I consider myself very much an empath and quite sensitive as a human. Whether you count that as highly sensitive, whatever the terminology you want to use. But yeah, sort of a highly sensitive human with very high energy is the best way to describe me. So I've learned, particularly over the last, since my recovery and from the eating disorder side of things, which is what started 6 years ago. I got some therapy at that time. Going through that process is actually a process of like learning and relearning who you are without all those things, without harnessing being sensitive as a human and working in ways that suits that sensitivity, but also learning how to relax and actually leaning into that kind of almost fear of being still and stopping and being the running motor all the time. What's that hiding from, perhaps? So I don't know if that's the quickest summary ever, but that's as quickest as I could make it.
Yeah, that was really helpful overview. And obviously people can dive in a bit more if they want to go to your website or go to Instagram as well. So what I'm curious with you, Becky, is it sounds like you were very indoctrinated by diet culture, weren't you, from a family perspective and also just from the culture in general?
But obviously as well, I guess as a little girl, you were living with undiagnosed ADHD and autism. I'm wondering as well, just in terms of you being able to kind of show up, get your emotional needs met, be kind of seen. And could you talk a little bit perhaps just about that side of things?
I think in terms of childhood, I think the bullying, I think it's so underestimated, childhood bullying, the impact that has on the development of, well, all mental health kind of issues, but particularly eating disorders. I can't tell you the amount of times I hear the similar story to my own of I was bullied as a child and then I developed an eating disorder. So there's that aspect. But yeah, going on in a household, there's lots of chaotic behaviour from other members of the family. And for me, I was just privy to that. And being, I suppose, that parentified child of providing the counselling for the parents when they're feeling out of control with someone else's behaviour in the house and coming to me and going, Becky, how do we solve this? And I'm like, I'm 8 years old. I'm just being a child. And actually, what about my needs being met within this? So I think there was lots of kind of just, again, not intentional of its time. And I have a lot of forgiveness towards my parents, and they were doing the best they could with what they had at the time with their own histories. But there was a sense of like, there's just constant chaotic kind of something's happened now. Okay, this has got to be dealt with. Now this has happened, or this has happened in the family. Okay, we've got to deal with this. And then, okay, and then my mum, there wasn't a lot of social or family support for her. So she came to me a lot with different aspects. Obviously, we've talked about that now, and that's, you know, we've had those conversations. But parentified child, definitely being the counsellor for other members of your family, you end up then becomes unsurprising when the career I then chose was helping other people and caring for other people, because I was good at it already, as it were. I knew I could do that.
Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? I think a lot of us, I mean, I think early on in my career are definitely drawn to all of this as the wounded healer, really, aren't you, in a way? Like you're so used to doing that kind of parental role.
Not now, Harry.
Not now.
No.
Not now.
I parent myself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. But I think it's not sustainable, isn't it, as a therapist? One would burn out very quickly, actually. And what about from the autistic side of things as well, in terms of any kind of sensory issues around food or anything for you as a child? Was that something that you experienced?
Less so around food, but more so around motion. Very sensitive to think about those different sort of sensory sensitivities. For some, it is food, and it might be that kind of difference of like more slimy textures or different sensitivities there. But for me, it was more, call it the vestibular kind of sensory aspect of just, you couldn't take me anywhere without throwing up because of motion sickness and being out. I'd get very scared and very nervous very easily just by going to do things sort of outside. And kind of bright lights for me, obviously too many people in an environment, smells, I was really strong with smells. If you've got perfume on, apologies, but I can't. I literally have to leave the room. Our own different sort of sensitivities. But I'd say actually surprisingly less so around food. But what I will say about food, growing up, there was always a sense of scarcity around food rather than sensory issues per se. So it's not that absolutely I would get fed, but I wouldn't know what I'd necessarily be eating. And a lot of the time it was kind of thrown together and not cooked. So that's why I could describe it more. It was the days of like Alpha Bites, potato waffles and chicken nuggets and turkey Twizzlers. I take it back now. Just thinking now, when I used to come in from school, I used to have to decompress from school because I found it really overwhelming and overstimulating being there. And then my go-to would be peanut butter sandwiches. Don't know why peanut butter sandwiches, always just been. And then I'd sit and eat them until I felt kind of numb, just to calm down, basically, from the experiences I had sort of socially. And it also then kind of solved the answer of what am I going to eat and when's my dinner coming? I don't know what time I'm going to have it. So it sort of had a kind of double effect of like, I'm hungry, but I'll come in from school and I have to wait until dinner, but I don't know when dinner is or what it is.
Sure. Well, I can imagine as well as being autistic as well, not having that kind of stability, safety or predictability of knowing where things are. Is that something that's quite important for you as well, to have that kind of structure and stability?
Yeah, very, very much. And those that sort of out of routine changes are very, very hard for me to manage, which is why my work now works really well, because I've got a strong sense of my own sort of choice my own autonomy, my own agency in terms of, well, okay, I know my dinner's at 5 because I've made it. And I like to eat my dinner at 5. I hate eating it at 8. It's far too late for me, but different things for different people, which is fine.
Yeah, for sure. And then what about with the ADHD and your own experience of how that really got tangled up again with binge eating? Like, how do you think? I think sometimes it's hard to separate, isn't it? I think sometimes what is the binge eating? What is the ADHD? Because a lot of the symptoms, there's quite a lot of overlap. But could you tell us a bit about your experience?
Yeah, and this is like being the big piece of the puzzle that I've been trying to uncover for the last however many years. For me, it's like, yeah, eating disorder recovery. I've still got ADHD. I've still got that hasn't gone away, even though I've recovered from the other aspects. But for me, I have to tackle the impulsivity is the main aspect for me with ADHD, that I can just reaching out for the nearest accessible option is not always about an emotional eating component. It's just an impulsive, I need some novelty. I'm bored is actually I'm understimulated. If I'm in this room that I'm in now all week and I've not been, then I'm literally going to just eat because it's there. Or I'll be like, oh, let's just go do this because I just want some excitement in my life. And that's where food then comes in. So it's still something I have to, that's a great question about where does it begin, where does it end? And that's still, for me, kind of what I'm unraveling. But impulsivity, and it's the thing I see that my clients struggle most with, and it's the thing I've struggled most with. It's like, okay, so I can eat regularly now. I can eat my 3 meals and 1 to 3 snacks, and I do all those things. And emotionally, I feel otherwise that my needs have been met that I know of. But yeah, I still want to reach for this dairy milk. Why? And that's that impulsivity aspect, novelty, the need for, novelty stimulation, dopamine hit.
Time for a short advertisement break. Are you a counsellor, dietitian, therapist, nutritionist, personal trainer, or other mental health professional? Are you seeing increasing numbers of your clients struggling with eating disorders and disordered eating? And are you keen to learn skills and strategies and build confidence in working with your clients who struggle with these issues? We know that increasing numbers of people are struggling with eating disorders, and we know that 85% of people with eating disorders are not underweight, and this means that many eating disorder symptoms are hidden. The Good Childhood Report in 2021 highlights appearance as a leading cause of unhappiness among young people and indicates that appearance concerns are increasing year upon year. So join my Eating Disorders Training Day on Zoom, face-to-face, or self-paced online. It will give you a really good understanding about the different types of eating disorders, including anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, and OSFED, with an introduction to RFED and neurodiversity and eating disorders. You'll explore typical causes of eating disorders and understand how to create a psychological formulation for your client. And this will be brought to you by relating to client examples. I will take you through then my specific knowledge, skills, and techniques, which can be used when supporting clients with eating disorders. You will get a full comprehensive training manual and access to the recording of the training afterwards and a full online version of the course. If you want to sign up, please go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk, and you might also be interested in my body image training for professionals too.
Sure. And so as part of your kind of self-care as well, I guess, is it really important then to really include self-caring novelty and stimulation as part of life?
Yeah, basically the novelty. I think for me, the greatest success I suppose I have with the food aspect is just incorporating a lot of variety. That's basically what I do these days. It's like, how varied can I make this? Has that met then the needs? But obviously with a caveat that sometimes it's good enough, it's imperfect, life happens, and it's just learning kind of from those experiences when they arise. Yeah, it's now having a really wide, varied set of self-care strategies. It's not just because someone says go and have a bubble bath because that's self-care. It's actually managing stress levels of like, well, it was this job specifically, but is what I'm doing appropriate? Am I experiencing too much stress? Do I need to change environment? From the environment, particularly the sensory environment, it's like, have I got what I need? Yes, I've got a standing desk here. I can get up and move around between sessions. It's making sure that I've given myself those adequate breaks so I can get up and move around, rest breaks, including more time than needed because I will be time blind and not. It's sort of putting in all these sort of protective strategies. Sometimes it does include bubble baths, but it's sometimes as well just making sure the real basic stuff, like of going to bed at the same time, waking up. Sleep so important for ADHD management, sleep and movement. And my movement is much more relaxed these days. It's not about hitting a high. for me now. It's used to be very much high intensity exercise, used to be CrossFit, absolutely nothing wrong with those types of exercise. But for me, I know I need to do something that engages my brain as well as my body. So for me now, that is mainly climbing, bouldering. I really love, because it also gives you autonomy in how you move. I can climb and scale a boulder, or I can go and have a cup of tea and come back to it later. You have more control. Whereas I think when you're doing a fitness class, and particularly someone who's obviously taught them for a long time and being a part of them, you're told you do with your body as you kind of wish. You don't have to go to this intensity or adapt to this exercise. But whether you will actually do that in front of a room of people and actually adapt to what you need, I don't always find is the case, because you feel that peer pressure of other people around you. Or at least I felt that when I did stuff like CrossFit, and feeling like I needed to push myself, and actually doing more gentle activities like bouldering, walking, more yoga type stuff, and occasionally a bit of dancing as well. But I'm not like, again, there's nothing prescriptive about anything that I do. It's like, I like these things. Okay, let's go do this. Or what works this week? What fits in? It's much more relaxed.
Yeah, and it sounds much more relaxed, doesn't it? And it sounds like it's really important, isn't it, I guess, to just be consistently coming back to how you're feeling in your body and then making those choices from that place, isn't it? And it sounds like as well, having autonomy and freedom and independence and choice, not feeling kind of controlled or boxed in, is also quite important in that whole process.
And it's called, the medicalized term is that pathological demand avoidance. The preferred term would be persistent drive for autonomy, basically. So if I've got autonomy, I'm happy. But I can also learn to cope with, obviously, if I don't have autonomy as well. But as you get older, I think you do, well, I feel I've got more autonomy than I obviously did when I was younger. So that can vary, obviously.
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah, I think there's a balance, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's a lot to be said for freedom, autonomy and choice, isn't there? And well-being.
Exactly.
But why are people with the neurodivergent vulnerable to developing eating disorders particularly?
There's definitely a trauma sensitivity aspect. So that is not just the trauma, like it could be experienced traumas from the past, but generally experiencing stuff that would, if there's been oppression or some kind of aspect where they've been, that's where like minoritized in some way, that they've been othered in some other way. So it might, they're masking to fit in with other people. And that can be absolutely exhausting. And you do it for so long and you normalize it for so long that you just think it's normal until you find out later on, oh, actually, I don't have to do that to fit in. I could be myself here and let other people accept that. I know from a statistic standpoint, there's more likely to be a trauma background. But again, with everything I say, I always say it with nuance, that it could be, but it might not be as well. And it isn't always. But I think that, yeah, in terms of that propensity to develop an eating disorder, I think there's lots of stuff around genetics we still haven't unpicked as well, around neurodiversity, an actual specific ADHD kind of genetic component. It's still a bit, dependent on what research you read, it's still a little bit unclear at times. And I would love to know more from almost that ancestral genetic kind of background. I was reading an article this morning about how dietary impacts can move across like 4 generations and have a knockdown effect. So I think there's that component as well that we still need to do more research about. But yeah, the impulsivity for me is a really big one we're missing from an ADHD standpoint when it comes to the development of the eating disorder, that need for novelty and seeking stimulation. And with autism, that kind of need to calm down and decompress and regulate.
Yeah, no, sure. No, it is so complex, isn't it? I think hearing you sort of talking it through, there's that whole genetic bit. And I think for most of us, we've had like transgenerational trauma in our families, haven't we? Because of past generations didn't have the resources or any support. So there's all of that. So then I guess as well as children, we've often experienced trauma. If you've got the neurodiversity bit on top, you've got another whole layer, haven't you? Because you're much more likely perhaps to just be misunderstood or to feel different or not to fit in. And
I'm just thinking about ARFID as well, avoidant restrictive food intake. You grow up and grow through the stage of quote unquote picky eating, fussy eating, which is a horrible terminology and phrase anyway, because it suggests some level of shame or blame around, almost like it's a choice that they're doing it, but they're seen as a developmental stage. But actually, I like seeing adults with avoidant restrictive food intake, because it's not just a childhood thing, and that impact sort of avoidant restrictive food behaviours have on all areas of life as well. So yeah, those food sensitivities there, I think how they go from childhood to adulthood, again, complicated, messy. I don't know. Obviously, I just remain curious and open-minded, and then learn from clients as to their own particular experience of, let's say, ARFID, because I've seen very different types, even from the subtypes that there are of ARFID. So yeah, they'll say with avoidant restrictive, intake, there is the diagnostic criteria says no body image issues. But I have met clients who have had that. Then there's an autism diagnosis in the mix as well, because there's that overlap between ARFID and autism. It all interlinks. Imagine like this little map in this biology, when you do like cell biology, and you've got those little like molecules that connect to the other molecules. And I feel like it's a big map that we're still unpicking.
Yeah, no, I think it's very validating for people to hear that, really, because I think it is just so complex and so nuanced. And like you're saying there, often it's said, isn't it? Yes, like the body image piece isn't there for some people, but actually, I think it's quite rare in our culture, isn't it, for any human not to have some body image stuff leaking under the surface somewhere. It is complex. And what about the gender identity piece as well? Because I know before we came on air, you were saying that that's something that's really important. So you say a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think in terms of gender spectrum, there's, again, an overlap between the gender spectrum and neurodiversity and having an eating disorder. The statistics show that those three very much blend together, and I was doing some work on it in terms of I can't remember the exact percentages off the top of my head, but there's quite a high prevalence there. Being trans, you're more likely to have autism, but again, don't quote me on the specific kind of data on that, but just this overlap between them. And I think there's lots of understanding we need there around gender identity, and your own individual identity and how you identify is incredibly important, and particularly from an eating standpoint, and that will show in your eating as a way, sometimes as a method of control. And again, body image coming into that as well, and body dysphoria, not feeling like you fit within your own kind of body. And then, yeah, again, I think there's just lots to unpick there. That's the gender spectrum, or just being LGBTQIA. That work's quite important to me as well, because it needs more behind it, I think, than it's currently kind of getting. And I know there's definitely more training coming through, but there needs to be more training services around it and just being supportive.
Yeah, no, I think, again, very validating for people to hear. And I think that really resonates just with my own experience with clients in the therapy room, and that real overlap. And I guess sadly as well, with more mainstream services, NHS services as well, under-resourced, etc. If you are neurodivergent as well, sometimes it's much more difficult to kind of get those really specific needs validated and met in treatment.
Voice. And like, how do you voice that if, like, again, it's about accessibility as well, and how you access the service. Do you have to pick up the phone and talk to someone, which generationally, I mean, I don't even know if I like picking up the phone if I can do a message. Sometimes it's about meeting different communication needs, different accessibility routes. Okay, does it have to be through your GP, or again, and it's down to obviously resource allocation. So much could be done in terms of harnessing social media well and appropriately with services. And yeah, just even getting a foot in the door and having, when you're going through the referral kind of criteria, or when you're registering someone, using the correct pronouns, or having just those things already there, it shows whether you're going to help someone potentially, or be, as you say, be seen and be heard for who you are.
Becky, when you work with your clients, I'm sure just from, as we've talked already, it sounds like you probably work slightly differently with each person, really, because of you are very much tuned to that individual. Could you give us a little bit of a flavour, really, of perhaps some of the ways that you would work with someone?
Obviously, I'm a CBT therapist trained, which suggests a bit more structured and maybe directive. But I'm also a mental health nurse, which is very holistic biology. psychology, the social aspects. So holistically, I am very keen to know about the biology, actually. So yeah, it has paid off having that degree, but because there's parts in there that are really important. But yeah, I'd say probably a more what we would call an integrated approach now. I'm not a very strict kind of robotic CBT therapist. I may have been trained, sorry, I don't know if I should have said that, but I've been trained as one. But it's about adapting to the needs of the client in front of you. Accessibility, inclusion, and diversity is very important, the work I do, and incorporating that into the assessment and treatment. So how that could look is, in that assessment, it's like, what are the best kind of, how do you learn? What's the best way that we can meet your needs of, are we going to write a food diary, or actually are we going to type it, or we can put it in your notes phone and you can PDF it across to me. You know, it's about making sure. I do use quite a lot of digital tools in my work. I have been known to use ChatGPT on occasion to do some challenging of some thoughts, which worked really well with an ARFID client. They were like absolutely certain that all people in restaurants eat every single part of their food and don't leave anything on their plate. And I was like, are we sure about this? Let's ask ChatGPT. And I literally put it in, and it's like only like 30 to 40% of people eat all the food on their plate at a restaurant. He's like, what? And so some thought challenging work using digital stuff for CBT. But yeah, I adapt to the needs of the client, but I do use EMDR as well. And that will come in. So the CBT part is the more kind of making sure you're regular eating, doing that more kind of, let's get all the basics in first, make sure you're eating and nourishing your body as much as you can. Then it might be, okay, so let's work on your thoughts. Let's change some of these beliefs. Okay, there's might be some trauma components still underneath that. Okay, can we process that with EMDR and process some of these memories? That's how I work at the moment until I change it again.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm really with you. I love that kind of integrative way of working. And I think, like, I'm with you in a way. I think CBT has some amazing tools, doesn't it? But I think it's quite rare. I don't know if I've ever worked with someone that's literally followed the CBTE process from start to finish.
It says it's highly individualized anyway. So I took that at its word. So.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, Becky, I think there's so much we could sort of talk about, but I'm just kind of wondering, for anyone listening who is neurodivergent, who's struggling with eating disorders maybe, and not knowing what to do at the moment, what would you sort of say to them maybe as a first step to dipping their toe in the water with getting some support maybe, or even heading in more that direction?
I just start to get curious about what's going on for them. And it might be, I don't want to just say journal, because that doesn't always, like it's like, start to just be curious, read books on the topic. Again, fitness highly underrated, using self-help books first, using social media accounts that with relevant sort of vetting of them, you do your own critical thinking about what you're looking at and what you're seeing, and seeing what resonates and seeing what doesn't. Then, of course, going through the appropriate routes, referral to GP, in the UK anyway, at least seeing what happens there. And that, again, will be dependent on whether you're able to finance or go through the NHS. Just get really curious about your behaviours and start to read up on those behaviours. And then, I still think the resources at BEAT are fabulous, as well as seeking support through the GP. And then, so if you're looking to them therapy, going onto the relevant sort of accrediting bodies, websites and registers and directories to look for a therapist. I'd start with self-help, read all the books, look at all the things, get curious.
Sure. And are there any books perhaps in particular that you found particularly helpful, particularly around neurodiversity and eating disorders?
Yeah, I'm thinking more for ARFID, which I know is slightly less relevant to me, but for ARFID, there's like a book that's like the official book, which is called the Picky Eaters Recovery Book. The content within it is, I think, quite useful as a step-by-step as it guides you through. Not a fan of the title, as you can probably tell. I actually met the editor and I told them that. But anyway, but yeah. And then another one is, I've actually got it here because I was going to do a little review on it, but obviously we're on an audio, but it's called the Autistic Teens Avoidant Eating Workbook, which I think is much more, I feel like Picky Eaters is more of like a structured kind of almost like CBT style. And then the autistic teens one, like, I don't think you need to be an autistic teen necessarily to get lots of good stuff out of this one. That's by Dr. Elizabeth Stay. Yeah, they're the main ones. Can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but yeah.
Sure. Maybe you'll have to write the
I might have to.
Yeah.
Or something else. Write my own. Yeah, no. Not at the moment.
Okay, lovely. So Becky, where can people find you if they want to get in touch? Where's the best places to go?
Yes, all the usual platforms, but predominantly I use Instagram, LinkedIn and Facebook. Have got a Substack. Yeah, they're the main places. But, and my website, obviously. I'd say Instagram and the website as the main initial ports. Quick inquiry.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Fantastic. Well, I should make sure that all the links are in the show notes. Thank you so much, Becky, for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate you just sharing your story really openly, and really interesting conversation, actually, just to understand more about ADHD, autism, eating disorders, all of it. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Harriet. It's been a pleasure.
So I hope you enjoyed this conversation just as much as I did. Do go and check out all of Becky's info in the show notes. If you're not following me already on Instagram, do seek me out at the Eating Disorder Therapist _. And for further support with your relationship with food, do go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. If you enjoyed this podcast, I'd be so grateful if you would follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. And if you enjoy written articles about eating disorders and tips and tricks from the therapy room, you may wish to subscribe to my Substack. Link is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.